Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at an Arcanine EX deck from the 2006 format. Now, just looking at the list, you're probably asking yourself, Jay, isn't this the exact same list you gave us for the RS to PK format? And it is. But many of the things that made the deck so good in the RS to PK format are the exact same things that make it good, and to be honest with you, even better in the 2006 format. And the number one thing that contributes to this is, I think, going to be the Houndoom line. And when I did the Nidoqueen video, somebody made a comment on there saying, "Hey, about me dropping the Houndoom line that Jeremy Moran played, and talked about how important the Houndoom line, how big Houndoom can be in 2006." And I agree completely with that. That Houndoom can be absolutely huge in the 2006 meta, because a lot of the decks rely very, very heavily on having large benches, and they have a very hard time playing with smaller benches. Now, the reason I didn't like the Houndoom line in Nidoqueen is because Nidoqueen is once again a deck that likes having a really large bench, and it's very hard to keep your bench small with Nidoqueen, and on top of that, you are hurting your own damage output by keeping your bench small with Nidoqueen. So there's some counterproductive strategies there. But how strong Houndoom is correct. I wanted to show this deck in particular because it's a deck that I feel that can take advantage of Houndoom much better than other decks in the format. And I think one of the things that makes it even better in the 2006 format versus the RSPK format is in 2006 you have more and more favorable matchups. A deck like Meta Knight, for example, is an absolute monster in the 2006 format, but can struggle a lot in the RSPK format just between switching the decks around. And decks that are usually pretty solid for you, like Dragtrode, for example, is once again even more commonly played in the 2006 format. In fact, the deck has really, really good favorable matchups against the majority of the decks in 2006. The one that I would say is probably the hardest for the deck is LBS, which is not an unpopular deck, but even being the worst matchup, it's probably somewhere between 35-65 and 40-60 for your worst matchup in the field, and you trade that off with quite a few 60-40 plus favorable matchups against other decks in the field. So I'm going to go ahead here and talk a little bit more about this list in particular, specifically how it relates to the 2006 format. Now, the general strategy of the deck is based around this Arcanine EX. It has, just to be honest with you, really, really efficient attacks. A Fire Colorless for 30, and then you're doing 22 something on the bench. Essentially, for 2 energy, you're hitting for 50 damage, ideally on the second turn of the game. And then the second attack for 2 fire and a colorless does 100 damage. And the big thing about Arcanine is a majority of your early game you are going to spend it using Overrun, doing that 30-20 spread as you're getting a second Arcanine ready on the bench. Now, what makes this so strong is you're always threatening that 100 damage. And your opponent has to play accordingly, knowing that you can do that 100 damage. So if you have a fire and a colorless, even though you're only doing 30-20 every turn, you are once again threatening that 100 damage, and that completely affects how they have to play the game. Now, beyond that, the Fire Remedy Pokebody, attach Fire Energy, heal 10 damage, remove 1 damage counter from remove all special conditions, and you heal 10 damage. Now, the special condition is not as big in 2006, but it's once again really, really nice to have. And that healing 10 damage can be pretty impactful when it comes to knockouts, depending on the matchup you're playing against. Lastly, 120 hit points for a stage 1 EX is pretty strong. It's definitely probably the highest you're going to see for a stage 1, and 120 in general is pretty respectful in the 2006 format. So all in all, just really, really solid attacks. The only complaint you could have about the card is probably that water weakness right there. I didn't talk much about it, but once again on the Growlithe, actually pretty solid attacks. The Body Slam and Fire Breathing are both decent for your basic. I do want to note I've had games come up where I'm playing the deck and I've got a Curse Stone locked in, and I'm just body slamming to try to buy time. Obviously, this is not a good situation for me to be in, but it is a strategy that you can use if you find yourself in a rough spot, and maybe that is a way you can edge out a win. I played a game in the RSPK format with the deck, and I won against an LBS deck because I was able to body slam with a Curse Stone and play for several turns, and I ended up taking some very key knockouts with that. Now, we play a 2-2 Houndoom line. Houndoom does a little bit of everything right. Obviously, in a very item-heavy format, allowing your opponent not to play items or stadiums is really, really huge. That's no rare candy, no counter stadiums, no Hold'em transceivers, just a lot of different things, to be honest with you. No warp point, no switch, anything like that at all. On top of that, it also has solid attacks, 20 damage, take that paralysis flip, and then if you ever need it, that flamethrower for 70. Going along with this, it is the Houndoom line does act as a pretty decent counter against Safeguard. So if you do run into that random Dustox EX, that Houndoom line is going to give you a pretty solid answer to it. And then it also allows you to play that 7-prize game, where ideally you're going to throw Arcanine, Houndoom, and then Arcanine against your opponent. Not only does that, like I said, let you play that 7-prize game, but it also allows you, or gives you an opportunity to admin your opponent to 1 and then force them to find outs based off of that. Play 1 Ambipom in the deck as well. Ambipom is just really strong because we're able to get it off of Great Ball. Essentially, we can max Great Ball in the deck to help us get those really good, consistent early starts. And then in the later stages of the game, we can always just trade that Great Ball in for a single draw. Holen's Electrode, because we're maxing the Elms for, once again, our good starts, just gives us something to grab in the mid and late stages of the game that if we don't need an Arcanine or a Houndoom, so the Elms isn't just a dead card in our hand. 4 Rockets admin. I've talked about this before. It seems very counterproductive to play a very high admin count in a deck that is designed to be very aggressive very quickly. But what you're going to find in a lot of situations is that your opponent basically is going to drain all of their resources into dealing with that first EX you throw at them. And then you're going to admin them to a lower hand size. Ideally, they're not going to be able to respond to the second Arcanine. Then if they do the exact same thing, just basically throw every resource they have to deal with the second Arcanine, you're once again going to be able to admin them to a lower hand size again. And ideally, you're just stopping them from ever developing any sort of strong board, and their mentality is just stay alive, where eventually you're going to catch them at a point where they just don't have anything, and you're going to win the game from there. Now, I'm going to say with the rest of these supporters, you can debate these a little bit. Even with the high admin count, I did go with 3 Copycat. I just found it a new hand card to be good. Usually I'm netting somewhere between 5 and 7 cards with it. I just find it to be strong, especially with Houndoom. If my opponent has a lot of cards in their hand they're not actually able to play, they will build their hand up a little bit unintentionally. 3 Steven's Advice, I talked a little bit about in the RSPK video, but essentially I found that players are getting better about playing against Houndoom, so they are less likely to have large benches. So you get a little bit of diminishing returns from Stevens, but I also think in the 2006 format, a lot of decks are required to have large benches to be successful, like Meta Knight, for example. Dragtrode struggles by keeping a small bench. So I do think that Stevens is good. I think you can debate a 4th Copycat there or a 2nd Mary's with it as well. If you're feeling even more gambling, you could probably play a VS Seeker also. 1 Scott, got to grab those stadiums. Also nice to grab those supporters in the early game. Make sure we got admins when we need them. 4 ER2. This is just to help us get ahead with not only our early aggression, but also keeping our opponent at bay with their energy attachments. I think you can make some arguments to play Pokemon Reversal in this format. I think you can make some arguments to not play ER2 at all and then play like a higher warp point count, maybe some more supporters. I think there's some different things you could argue there. I just think ER2 is probably the best option. 4 Great Ball, once again, maximize those early, those good early starts, and then later stages of the game, it's always going to be a free Ambipom or Apom. I'm going to say I think Apom is highly underplayed in the 2006 format. I think any deck that plays a Great Ball or heavy Mentor engine, I mean like 3 or 4 Mentor, should be playing Apom. So at the very least, even if they don't have a great supporter to play, they can always Apalm, or they can always mentor. Um, Not only to get it out of their hand and out of their deck, but they can also turn that into a free draw with Apalm. It's not obviously as good, but essentially it does give them something to do with the card other than being just dead in their hand. One warp point. I like to have at least one switching option in the deck. Sometimes you can catch your opponent with stuff. Sometimes they'll try to send something up with Arcanine so you don't knock it out on the bench. Like maybe they have something with like 80 damage on the bench that's got 100 hit points. They don't want you to knock it out with Overrun. So then they just send it active. Warp Point gives you an out to that. Warp Point is just good in general. Now, the stadiums, I did talk about this in the RSPK video a lot. I think in this format in particular, decks rely very heavily on powers. Once again, obviously your Meta Knight, your Drag Troj, your LBS. That Curse Stone is going to be just so clutch. Because not only are you putting a lot of pressure on your opponent, but you're also limiting their options with their powers. And then they're not going to want to put powers into play. They have to really think about it. I'm going to say in a lot of situations, we do not play hard Pidgeot counters. Like we're not playing the Lunatone Solrock. So it is really important that, I guess I find in a lot of matchups, I try to get chip damage on Pidgeot very early. So if they have like a Pidgey, I'll be putting my 20 on it, or my Pidgeotto, I'd be putting 20 on it. So then when Curse Stone does get in play, ideally they might only get 1 or 2 quick searches off with it before that Pidgeot does go down to the Curse Stone. One Battle Frontier. Not only does this give us a 5th stadium, we've got to make sure we keep those Desert Ruins out of play. And then it also gives us an out against Drag Trode or maybe a Meta Knight deck, a Pidgeot, just where we do have an option to shut that off. Generally, getting the chip damage in with Curse Stone is going to be better, but it does give us an option where sometimes if we just catch Drag Trode in an early bad spot, just saying no powers is going to be stronger for us than trying to build up the damage with Curse Stone. Same thing with Pidgeot. Sometimes just saying no Pidgeot is better than watching it go down slowly to a Curse Stone. Just depends on the situation. And then 12 Fire for React. This does seem very high, I know, with a total of 16 energy, plus the Electrode. But this deck does not take much to be happy. You literally, if you just throw an Arcanine at the opponent, you're just getting your energy drops every turn. Just keep putting that pressure on. And while the energy count does seem high, the goal is you want to snowball that game as much as possible. You do not want to miss energy drops. Just especially in the first 3 to 5 turns of the game, you just absolutely do not want to miss energy drops. You want to make sure you're getting those down every single turn. I've also found in situations where if I am playing against a deck that has special conditions, I need to make sure that I'm able to see fire energy very often, or if I need to heal 10 damage, so playing the higher count does help there. And then obviously you do have to play 4 reacts in the deck because you are going to want to be able to use that Flame Swirl, and discarding 2 fires is too painful. You are going to want to be able to discard the reacts. So that's going to go ahead and wrap up the video for Arcanine EX in the 2006 format. I've got to say, not only is this in my opinion, a very high tier 1 deck, it's also extremely friendly to new players. So if you want to play some 2006 games, or you are trying to get in with some friends that play 2006 games, this is an absolutely great deck to play. So like I said, it's very easy to pick up, and it's a very high tier 1 deck. But that's going to go ahead and wrap up the video here. If you got any comments or questions, post them down below. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel. And of course, I hope to see you in the next video.